As a complete beginner, I spent a solid week learning and making a 29-second visual effects sequence as part of a longer video that I'm making. This video is about how I made that sequence. First off, here's the finished clip. So Dan said put this on the floor and then stand back. Yep, that took a whole week because I had no idea what I was doing. Well, let's have a look how I did it. Filming the base footage was pretty straightforward, just me with a rough idea of what I wanted to achieve, messing around in the garden. I got no idea what the neighbours must think. From previously shooting on green screen, I knew that as I would be cutting elements out of this video to place over the top of other elements, I'd need to film with a high shutter speed to try and get rid of as much motion blur as possible, because motion blur makes it nearly impossible to cut video out. I didn't try and time my actions to anything, I planned to build the effects around the video. I made the sheet in the free 3D program Blender, using a cloth simulation with the top vertex points, where the washing line will be, assigned to a vertex group, and then set that as the pin group in the cloth simulation shape controls. The Stargate model itself was a free download, and I have a previous video going over how I made the Stargate's kawoosh effect. I've improved it slightly in this version by learning I could add an emission node to the material's volume setting rather than mixing it into the surface. In order to cut the hole in the sheet as the Stargate's kawoosh goes through it, I copied the cloth sim and applied the cloth modifier on the frame where I wanted to change to the destroyed version. This created a 3D mesh at the point of intersection. I then put a displacement map on a sphere to make it bobbly, and difference booleaned it to the sheet to cut out a ragged shaped hole resembling the Stargate's kawoosh. I noticed that the washing line on the base footage wasn't still, but undulating backwards and forwards throughout the whole scene, so I moved the sheet's origin to the end and frame by frame animated its position to match the movement of the line. This did give the sheet an extra sway movement though to help sell the realism, as the movement was animated into the cloth sim. I rendered the sheet and Stargate out into an EXR image sequence with a transparent background, which I could then overlay on top of my footage. The first thing I noticed was that my sheet was over the top of my washing line pole, so I copied the base footage, drew a mask around the pole, and then adjusted every single frame to keep the mask in line with the pole. That was a fun 3 hours. You definitely need patience for this game. Everything's stitched together in Adobe After Effects. In hindsight, I should have done each separate little effect as its own project and stitched them all together, as the After Effects composition got really big and messy really quickly. Oh well. Because the sheet and Stargate layer sits on top of the base footage of me in the garden, they also sit on top of me. I therefore had to cut me out in order to have just me on top of the sheet and Stargate layer. To do this, I copied the base footage and used After Effects rotoscoping system. You spend a bit of time telling it what you want to cut out, and it intelligently goes through every frame and cuts you out. This gave me footage of just me, which I could then place on top of the sheet layer. While I was working on this section, I noticed the camera changes focus as I walk away. So to try and add some realism, I animated a blur effect on the sheet to try and match the focus that the camera was pulling. The device that opens the Stargate is a simple model that I made in Blender. The body is a deformed, rounded cylinder with a slight displacement map, and some rune shapes I imported to Blender as PNGs, traced and extruded. I then booleaned them out of the body of the device and gave them a glowing blue material on the inside. I found a tutorial to use the compositor in Blender to give them a nice glow when it rendered out. In order to animate the device and match it to my movements, I imported the video of me into Blender as a camera background, fixed the camera, and then frame by frame animated the position of the device to match my hand. I rendered and imported this into After Effects. took another copy of the base footage and masked my top finger out frame by frame so it would sit on top of the device to make it look like I was holding it. I then duplicated the footage of the device, set it to silhouette mode, blurred it and moved it down slightly to make the shadow on my thumb. In order to only have the shadow on my thumb and not over the whole background, I again went through frame by frame and set a mask around the shadow to cut it off where my thumb ends. I followed the footage through until where I placed the device down on the ground and add a tiny subtract mask to make it look like it's just sitting in the grass rather than sitting there on a flat plane. I downloaded a free plugin called Saber from Video Copilot. It creates these great energy beams which I animated coming out of the device. I used the audio tone generator in After Effects to create a deep, grungy, electrical buzzing sound. To get the Stargate build up from the blocks, back in Blender I added a particle system to the gate and added the explode modifier. This made it fall into pieces. I reversed the footage in After Effects to make it look like it was building. A mask makes it look like it's coming out of the confines of the circular energy beam. I found a sound effect of tumbling rocks to fit to the pieces all clunking together. The blast that comes out the Stargate is called a kawoosh. In my previous video I got to the limit of my current abilities to make a convincing looking Stargate kawoosh. The original effect was filmed practically by blowing air into a tank of water. This is the best I could do in a 3D program as a beginner. This is the animation straight out of Blender. It's pretty boring looking, so to try and sell the effect I added some After Effects light ray effects to give it some sparkle across the whole screen. I cranked the intensity up to brighten it significantly to try and make it look so bright that it overexposed the camera. I also added some motion blur to soften it a bit and lose those perfectly crisp 3D rendered edges. So here it is with the extra lighting applied to the kawoosh. Next, I added a general blue glow to the area around the kawoosh to try and make it look like it's giving off light to the scene. Then I masked out and animated a blue glow underneath on the grass. I thought it looked cool to animate the shadow edge because I thought the light would shine further underneath the gate the further away it got from it. I also put a tiny shadow mask onto the device on the floor. Behind the gate, I added a general spotlight up the fence and some caustic watery ripples which we'll look at next. For the sound, I blatantly nicked the actual Stargate sound from the show. Please don't sue me. So fans of Stargate will know that the gate gives off a watery, ripply, caustic light effect. I spent ages figuring out how to do this in After Effects and nearly gave up until I found an effect called Ethereal, which used something called Wave World. Wave World simulates one or two undulating points. I played with Wave World until I had two ripples interfering with each other. This gives you a black and white height map. You then take this pattern, apply it to the composition using the Add Blend mode, and using the 3D layer mode position one layer against the fence and another on the floor. I then just drew circular masks to control the shape of the layer and turned down the opacity so the effect wasn't so strong. Et voila! Watery ripples in my garden. So the Stargate's event horizon was the part I was most looking forward to because I just love water simulations. The event horizon is the shimmery pool of water in the middle of an open Stargate. I started by using 3D program Blender to try and replicate the look from the original film, and I think I got pretty close. But then I realised it was so dark in the film because it's a mirrored surface and it was reflecting the dark bunker that they were in. So I imported a still of my garden and I had this reflect instead. In Blender, the horizon is a plane with a shallow displacement map on it, animated to drive the ripples. I decided it looked better with a slight blue tint applied rather than purely mirrored. Back in After Effects, I wanted to transition the event horizon in a way similar to the film and the show SG-1, so I added one mask to fit the event horizon to the shape of the Stargate, and then animated another subtracting mask to reveal it from the outside to the inside. I whacked a turbulent displacement map onto the mask to stop it being perfectly round and give it some wibbly edges. That's a technical term. I spent the best part of an hour on those 4 frames, or 1/6 of a second of video, but I'm learning so it's allowed, I guess. The event horizon has another light rays effect on it to give it those sexy shimmery rays. To try and add a bit of realism, I tap the sheet. In Blender, I simply made a sphere, put collision on it and timed the animation to where I tap it in the original footage, so the sheet actually gets pushed back in the simulation by this invisible ball. In After Effects, I mask out the end of my arm to go over the sheet layer so I can give it a little boop. Boop! I decided to try and be clever and have my reflection in the Stargate as I jumped through it. So I rotoscoped out the footage of me jumping through the gate and put it into Blender with a transparent background. In Blender you can turn off camera visibility so it doesn't show the original footage but still shows its reflection in things. This is perfect, it's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to have some ripples on the event horizon when I jumped through it, so after watching loads of tutorials I found I could use Blender's dynamic paint feature. I set the plane to be a canvas and created a very simple model of me in the same position as when I jumped through the gate. This model was set to a dynamic paint brush so it would interact with the canvas and leave ripples. I hid the model so it only left the ripples. I rendered this out and flung it into After Effects. I spent ages lining up the two pieces of footage. Because this is all flat 2D footage, just masking me out at the centre of the event horizon looked like I was going through a straight line. I went through each frame and tried to mask myself out as my limbs would have hit the surface to try and make it look more 3D. I applied the caustic ripple effect to my right hand edge as I got closer to the gate to light me up. Finally, because my source footage layer is from a fixed position, I just copied it and masked out some of the video where I'm not in the way and placed that over the top, making me disappear and not come out the other side of the Stargate. Well, so there we have it, my first proper foray into After Effects. To be honest, for my first proper attempt, I'm pretty proud of that. Please leave a comment below to let me know how you'd have done any part differently, or how you'd improve it from this point forward, or if there's anything in particular that you liked about it. Right now, I need to draw a line under this and move on, else I'll never finish my video. I'm going to use Unreal Engine next for the land that's through the Stargate. Consider subscribing if you'd like to keep up with the journey. Bye for now.